So if most people are too, I don't know, if not, it's not even misinformed, just ignorant, like the hobbits or the hooligans, and they're just indelibly marked by these cognitive biases, and they arrive maybe unreliably at actual good policy, or maybe it's just almost like flipping a coin or rolling the dice. Would this problem be lessened than if, because democracy is saying, at least in ours, there's universal suffrage, like everyone has the right to vote, barring a few rules like age and you can't be a felon. Everyone could run for office for, and similar rules apply there. So would the problem be lessened if you could just tighten the circle on who is allowed to vote?
Maybe. So that's this one of these questions, and so there's this term. I didn't coin this term, but it's called epistocracy. It came from another philosopher, which is supposed to mean the rule of the knowledgeable. Some people who took Greek are pissed; they think it should be epistemocracy. That's better. But the guy came up with it. He said, like, I know it should be epistemocracy, but that's ugly, so I'm just going to call it epistocracy. So maybe something like that would be justifiable, but there's all these issues about whether democracy is good for its own sake and all this. It really takes a lot of work to get there. The thing that I think is worth experimenting with isn't really that. What I think we should do is something called enlightened preference voting. In the book, I had another name for it, but I realized it was a dumb name, so I've changed it. Enlightened preference voting works like this. On election day, everybody gets to vote, and they all get to vote as an equal, including children. I'm also not in favor of disenfranchising felons, even in our current system. I don't see a point to doing that. Everyone gets to vote, your kids, your cat, it doesn't matter. But when you vote, you make it a little bit more complicated. What you do is three things. First thing you do is you tell us who you are. So we find out your demographic information, like what race you are, your gender identity, your income level, your employment status, religiosity, marriage, children, because this stuff, identity stuff, affects how people vote. The second thing we do is we find out what you want. Whatever the election is about, whether it's a referendum on, like, joining the European Union or leaving it, or picking a president or whatever it might be, you tell us what it is you want. The third thing you do is you take a quiz of basic political information. Questions like what's the unemployment rate, who's your current senator, etc. Those sorts of things. This quiz doesn't determine whether your vote counts or not. It's not disqualifying, you're qualifying. It's something more complicated, more interesting. When you have these three sets of data, who people are, what they want, and what they know, what you're able to do is, with kind of basic statistics that like lots of people could calculate, your typical newspaper has someone who could verify this, you can make a statistical estimate of what would the country have voted for if it were demographically identical, but had gotten a perfect score on the quiz. It's a way of simulating a fully informed public. You can also simulate what happens if the public is completely uninformed. And by the way, this method I'm talking about, it's something that's been used by political scientists and economists for about 40 years. It's the way that we know. If someone says like, oh, I've noticed that white people tend to support free trade, is it whiteness that makes them support free trade? And we can go, that's a good question. We use this kind of method to test that. We can say, actually, it turns out there's not a relationship between them. It's something else. So we can use, this is something that we've already been doing. So we could use it to try to estimate what would we have voted for if only we were fully informed. An example of this would be take Brexit back in 2016. Now, I'll put my cards on the table. I don't think the Brexit vote was a good idea. I benefited from it because one of the reasons that book got translated into so many European languages was because of Brexit. So thank you, British people. You've made me quite a bit of money, and I appreciate it. But during the Brexit vote, we actually had a number of polling firms ask the British people questions about facts relevant to the election or to the decision, such as like, how much money goes into the EU, how much comes out, where is investment coming from, what % of people are European immigrants in the UK, etc. Both the Remain and Leave voters got those wrong, but the Remain voters were much closer to the truth than the Leave voters. If you take the data we have about who people are, what they know, and what they want, and you estimate what would have happened on that day had the British people been fully informed about those questions, they would have voted to Remain. It's like really clear.
Wow.
So the difficulty here is, it's one thing if I say, if someone like Larry Bartels or Brian Kaplan or Martin Gillens or someone does a study like this and they publish it in a political science journal, nothing's at stake, with like what the questions are, what the categories are. But if we did this in real life, people always ask the question, and they should ask this question, who gets to decide what's on that quiz about what counts as information? I mean, after all, people are going to try to game that quiz in order to make it benefit their party, which is absolutely right. Of course they will.
Yeah.
Politicians are corrupt. They're self-interested. So this might sound paradoxical, but my idea is this. We actually have democracy decide what goes on the quiz. We use what my friend Alex Guerrero's idea. We randomly select 500 citizens and we say, we're going to pay you to spend a weekend coming up with 40 questions that you think a person should know to count as an informed citizen. They can be anything you want. It could be, what's the average price of a bus ticket across Manhattan? It could be, what's the price of milk or daycare? It could be, who is your senator? Whatever you want it to be.
And we just run with whatever they come up with?
I mean, honestly, I think I just give them complete freedom. And part of the reason I'm pretty confident about that is because when you actually ask citizens this, the surprising thing is the questions they come up with are really quite sensible. So they'll say things like, oh, an informed citizen ought to know who their Congress people are. Now, you ask those people, who are your Congress people?
You know?
I don't know. I don't know who my Congress people are, but I understand I should know that. That seems relevant, right?
Yeah.
They should know which party controls Congress. They should know some of the laws. They should know some facts and stuff that might be relevant. So we basically empower a panel of, say, 500 citizens to come up with a quiz, maybe like a couple weeks before the election. And then on election day, you take that quiz. And it doesn't qualify you or disqualify you. It doesn't say whether you get to vote or not. It's just a thing that allows us to estimate as a whole, or maybe better way of putting it is like to extract wisdom from the crowd. So we can come up with, like, we don't actually have the ability to like educate Americans or Australians or anyone else and make them well informed, but we can get the next best thing. We can simulate what we would have done if we had been informed. So that's the basic idea. I think that's the thing we should experiment with that has the best chance of like really working.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
You said we asked them 3 things. Who are you? You're going to take the quiz, and what do you want was the second one.
Yeah.
Do you mean that which candidate are you voting for? What policies are you voting for? Or larger in life, what are you hoping for out of government? What do you mean? What do you want?
Yeah. The what do you want really is just whatever we right now in any country have on your ballot.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
What's your selection? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not taking any stance on what sorts of things people should be voting for. So I'm neutral as
Right.
far as we have referenda or candidates, or if we vote on parties rather than
Very
candidates.
Vulcan
But-
of you. Yeah.
Yeah, but whatever that stuff is, don't just ask people what they want. Ask them who they are and what they know,
Yes.
and then figure out. Well, okay, it's as if we've waved a magic wand and simulated a fully informed Australia. What would they have voted for? Oh, it turns out they would have voted for this. And maybe a good way of putting it is, people often say things like, well, had we done that, who would have won in 2016? Would it have been Clinton or Trump? And I'm like, it's actually pretty much more radical than that, because the way that parties run, the way that they campaign, the kinds of advertisements they have, the platforms they offer, the types of candidates that they put up for office, that's all dependent upon the voting system that we have. The reason we have 2 major parties in the United States and Germany has many, many major parties is because we have different voting systems. So had we had this system, it probably would not have been Clinton versus Trump. It would have been 2 higher quality candidates to begin with.